For all you elk hunters out there, chasing turkeys is basically the same thing. I know the reaction you just gave me, but don't knock it till you try it, and don't try it without OnX. The Hunt app will not only help you find new areas on public ground, but I use it to find out landowner info to get permission on private ground that I see birds on as well. OnX Hunt has a special offer for you. Use code CAL to receive 20% off your membership at onxmaps.com/hunt and find more birds this spring.
After 3 years of work, our follow-up to the Meat Eater Fish and Game Cookbook is here. It's the Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, campfire, and camp stove. Here is your book for everything that's best cooked or eaten outside. From grilling to open fire cooking to Dutch ovens to smokers to barbecue to backpacking meals to how to pull off the perfect fish fry, with pit stops along the way for lessons about Ice Age cooking methods and the best 5 ways to construct a cooking fire you can be proud of. And of course, we're focusing on wild game and fish here with over 100 recipes, including stuffed venison burgers 3 ways, wild duck with ahi verde sauce, a jerky made with cola, a gin and tonic made with fire-charred lemons, and grilled frog legs made with a sticky sweet sauce. This ain't your normal cookbook, so be prepared to be surprised. Get your copy now. For more info, visit themeateater.com or buy it wherever books are sold.
From Meat Eater's World News Headquarters in Bozeman, Montana, this is Cal's Week in Review with Ryan Cal Callahan. Now, here's Cal.
Hey there, Cal's Week in Review fans. Welcome to this week's special drop of the Cal's Week in Review podcast, where we get to dig a little deeper on, the topic du jour, which is the fancy way of saying the next fire that we got to address. With me, as always, is Jordan Sillers. Jordan has been researching and writing his butt off and helping out in a million different ways and deserves a ton of credit here. But our special guest is Kip Adams of the National Deer Alliance. Kip is the Chief Conservation Officer for NDA. Kip, thank you so much for joining us. Can you just tell us real briefly, for those who aren't familiar, and just so you know, it's a good opportunity because we have a ton of people who write in and say, what conservation groups should I join? I always tell them to figure it out for themselves. I'll provide the information, but you're an adult, so you gotta make the decision ultimately. So we're empowering people the hard way. So for those unaware, Chief Conservation Officer at National Deer Alliance is going to tell you what areas the NDA focuses on, and if those things are interesting to you, you should get involved. And we'll tell you back at the end of the show how exactly to get involved. And then we're going to talk about this topic, which, if you recall, the first time we talked about this, I was reading it right here on the podcast, and I just said there is no possible way this is true. But it is House Bill 3462 in Oklahoma, the Chronic Wasting Disease Genetic Improvement Act, which, by the way, just passed the full Oklahoma legislature. It is on Governor Kevin Stitt's desk as of the first of the month here. So we're going to get more into that in depth, I hope. And then, but first, let's hear about Kip, your role at NDA, as well as again, what areas NDA focuses on for those who want to learn more.
Sure. Well, the National Deer Association is a national wildlife conservation organization that specializes in education. Our mission is to ensure the future of wild deer, wildlife habitat, and hunting. And the wild deer part of that is very important to us and very critical to the conversation we're having here today. And I like to say that nobody fights harder for deer hunters than we do. We have members all states, all provinces, and several countries, in large part because they know we fight for hunters' rights and they want the information from an educational standpoint that we're able to share with them. Our big areas that we work in are certainly the conservation end, but we like to take information from the academic institutions and what managers have out there and put it into a format that that every hunter can understand. So we teach people about deer, how deer see, hear, what they eat, how they move through the landscape. We're involved with policy. Most hunters, as you're keenly aware, have no idea how many bills are proposed each year that would be really, really bad for hunting and for wildlife if they pass. So we have an advocacy arm to make sure that we're supporting hunters' rights, on good bills and opposing those bad ones. We do a bunch of teaching. We have a deer steward program to allow people to learn more about deer. We spend a bunch of time teaching people how to enhance habitat for deer. Habitat is where it's at to make sure that there's enough food and cover for deer and other wildlife species. And we have a big public lands initiative. We're not in a position where we buy more public land, but we are in a position where we can take public land that we already have that's open to hunters and make it better for hunting by enhancing that wildlife habitat and improving some access and allowing people to be able to access it and hunt it. So the final thing that we get involved with is this is under our conservation umbrella, is from the disease end. And we believe that there is no single issue that has a greater threat to the future of wild deer herds or our hunting opportunities than chronic wasting disease. And so we spend a bunch of time educating hunters about it, working with our state and federal officials, to make sure we have good surveillance programs and monitoring efforts and being able to support research so that we can learn all we can to help beat this terrible disease. So from those perspectives, you take the educational aspect of what we do, the policy end and the disease end, and those three things are what's landed me here, getting to have a good conversation with you today.
Sounds like a very interesting job. And lots of good things happening that make it a fulfilling one. What's a chief conservation officer do?
I'm a wildlife biologist, and so trained in biology, and I oversee our conservation program. So all of those different pieces that I just talked about, we do. I get my hand in a little bit of all of them. So I get to help oversee the research that we're involved with. I really enjoy the educational programs that we do. So I get to do a fair amount of teaching. I get to help develop our educational programs. Whether that be something an in-person class or an online class. I get to oversee what we do from a public land standpoint, and then get to help our policy folks out as well. So it's nice to have my hand in a bunch of different things like that, particularly given how they're all intertwined to affect our our deer and other wildlife species, and most notably our hunting opportunities for them.
So it sounds like you maybe not uniquely positioned, but certainly in a small group of people who are positioned in a way to tackle what Jordan has in store for us today, which is this interesting situation in Oklahoma. And again, my perspective on things, my armchair expertise, when I read HB 3462 in the state of Oklahoma, I kind of laughed because I thought there's no way that this is possible. This and Jordan and Kip, please jump in here and make sure I'm not totally getting this wrong. But there's an idea, and it's kind of in the name here, Chronic Wasting Disease Genetic Improvement Act. There's an idea that through selective breeding of captive whitetails, we can genetically improve the herd in captivity that could then be released onto the landscape. And those genetic improvements, which would be a resistance to chronic wasting disease, as an example, would then be distributed through the wild herd. Now, one thing that we'll come back to is it's specific to Oklahoma, which is another bizarre part of this to me, because once you release it onto the landscape, you have no control where these deer go, and unless Oklahoma deer are special and they know where the Oklahoma line stops and they know what a non-resident deer smells like, and they don't interact with them. This is something that is bound to go beyond the state of Oklahoma. This idea comes from another livestock industry, the domestic sheep industry. There's a cousin disease called scabies in domestic sheep that the sheep industry has been working on for a really long time. They have found success through finding individual animals with some sort of resistance to this disease, and selectively breeding for those traits over decades to strengthen the herd and limit the prevalence of scabies in domestic sheep. And I say idea because, from what I know, and I'm dying to get into this with you, Kip, it's theory versus fact, from what I know. So, Jordan, do you want to jump in here? Again, great article. Can we breed our way out of CWD? Oklahoma wants to try at themeateater.com. You've done a bunch of research here. Do you want to tee us up or help fill in the gaps there before we get into it with Kip?
Yeah, I think a couple things are worth pointing out. The first is that this would be a first of a type of this program in the country. So Oklahoma would be the first state to introduce a program like this. Also, right now, the deer breeders can sell deer and move them to high fence operations, right? So a high fence hunting ranch are the only kind of outfits that they can move their deer to. This bill would allow them to sell deer to anyone, right? So whether you have a high fence operation or whether you're just, a landowner with a couple hundred acres, this bill would let you ship in deer from one of these facilities that have this gene that is resistant to CWD. And I think one good place to start here for Kip might be to talk a bit about when we say a deer is resistant to CWD, what do we mean by that? Because I think once you start to think about what that actually means, you realize there's a pretty broad range of possibilities that statement could mean. So, yeah, and I know, and I interviewed Kip for this article, and I asked him this question, and I want this audience also to hear what he has to say on that.
Awesome. Well, let's start there. Kip, please.
All right. I think that when people who aren't familiar with this hear a CWD resistant gene, that sounds like it means that deer that have this gene can't get the disease, that they're resistant to the disease. And the facts are very clear that that is not true. CWD is 100% fatal to all deer. They have never identified a deer that would not die from the disease. So starting right off the bat to claim that, oh yeah, these deer are resistant and they can breed with other deer to make them resistant, just simply is not true. Every single one of these deer will still get the disease and still die from it. There is some data to suggest, yeah, they may live a little bit longer, in the terms of a few months longer. But even that isn't really clear. But just to clear the tables right off the bat, all deer will get this disease, and all deer that can get it and all deer that do will die from it. So this is not making deer not susceptible to it.
And I guess to say, like, the testing and the data, how do we get to a point where we can look at a deer and say, well, that one has the gene that's going to make it last longer than the next one?
Well, their research can predict that at about 80% certainty whether deer have this certain trait or this certain, within their genotype. Your genes are different than mine or different from Jordan's. we can do genetic testing with us to see, how similarly we are or how different we are or how closely we're related. So it's testing like that they can use to say, oh, okay, what different traits, or genes are these deer carrying? They have identified a specific gene that they tout as, oh yeah, this is what makes deer more resistant to this, and more being the key word there. So those are the deer that do live a few extra months, and those are the ones that they want to breed with others to, or I guess as a way to try to get around this disease. But that testing is pretty uniform, and so they're able to see the different genetic traits that these animals have.
Boy, there's so much to cover here. So my gut reaction to this bill, right? Because like I kind of covered in my long-winded intro, is if you're talking about putting a captive cervid out on even private property, which most Oklahoma is private property, but it's a low fence situation, it just becomes public wildlife at that point. So where I get confused is, I guess the short question, right, is how is it legal? We have an association, a national association of fish and wildlife agencies. Is there a system in place where all the surrounding states can step in and say, well, this decision goes beyond the borders of Oklahoma, and our management styles or our science doesn't support this or agree with this? So that was my gut reaction. Is I'm like, okay, well, there's got to be some mechanism in place that can prevent a state from making a decision of potentially impacting, the very real monetary investments of other states, the budgets, the whole system of wildlife management that, again, a deer doesn't recognize when it moves from one management region to the next.
Yeah, in this case, there's not, because state oversee, or the state owns those of the wildlife. Our North American motto gives trusts that resource to the state. So, and every state then is able to write laws or dictate how they will manage that. So there's not federal oversight there. And, and so for this case, Oklahoma, the state wildlife agency can choose what they want to do. It's very different from what they do in Texas, very different from what they do in Arkansas, my home state of Pennsylvania, Montana. Everybody tends to be a little different with this. And in this case, if this passes in Oklahoma, then it would be legal to take these captive deer and restock them. And one point we should mention here too, that is, the state wildlife director ultimately has, in theory, the final say in, hey, do these things happen or not? You've covered this many times, and there's a whole lot of politics that go into decisions made at some of those state agencies. Unfortunately, it's not just following the science. Well, this just so happens in Oklahoma right now that the legislator's pushing this bill. There's some deer breeders on the legislature. The Board of Commissioners that oversees the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation contains some deer breeders. And the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation, which is a fantastic state wildlife agency, is without an executive director. So, the person that is highest in that agency, that can help thwart this, that position is currently vacant. So that definitely has a play here in how this thing may be passed in Oklahoma, and if so, why they legally could take these captive deer and put them out and mix them with wild deer. Even though at some point, you're right, they could cross the line into Texas or Arkansas or anywhere else.
And one thing to note as well is I've been talking with some folks in Oklahoma who are pretty familiar with this issue. There's a legislator there named, I have it in my notes here, Representative Kevin Wallace, and he's a deer breeder. So he's a legislator who is also owns a deer breeding facility. And Kip was just mentioning that open director position. He actually applied for that position last time there was an opening. And my understanding is he didn't have I think it requires a bachelor's in wildlife science or something along those lines. And he didn't have that, which is why he didn't get it. There's a concern that if those qualifications are amended, that he then could be installed in that director position, in which case you can imagine how this program would probably move forward, considering he was also very influential behind this bill. So that's another thing, if you live in Oklahoma, to be on the lookout for.
Which of you listening right now took a class in school about Family Finances 101? No one? Yeah, me neither. Just like the importance of a will or college savings plan or even life insurance or estate planning, we have to know these things. But how do we figure it all out? That's why I'm excited to partner with Fabric by Gerber Life. Listen, one of the few things expected of you in life is to not let other people pick up after you. That's why I have life insurance, to make sure my stuff is taken care of even when I'm gone. Fabric by Gerber Life is term life insurance you can get done right here, right now. You could be covered from your couch in under 10 minutes with no health exam required. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their family. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/Cal. That's meetfabric.com/Cal. MEET. Fabric.com/Cal. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions.
After 3 years of work, our follow-up to the Meat Eater Fish and Game Cookbook is here. It's the Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, campfire, and camp stove. Here is your book for everything that's best cooked or eaten outside. From grilling to open fire cooking to Dutch ovens to smokers to barbecue to backpacking meals to how to pull off the perfect fish fry, with pit stops along the way for lessons about Ice Age cooking methods and the best 5 ways to construct a cooking fire you can be proud of. And of course, we're focusing on wild game and fish here with over 100 recipes, including stuffed venison burgers 3 ways, wild duck with ahi verde sauce, a jerky made with cola, a gin and tonic made with fire-charred lemons, and grilled frog legs made with a sticky sweet sauce. This ain't your normal cookbook, so be prepared to be surprised. Get your copy now. For more info, visit themeateater.com or buy it wherever books are sold.
How much similarity is there between scrapies and CWD? We're talking about a sheep versus a white-tailed deer in this instance, and scrapies versus CWD. So 2 totally different biological systems, 2 totally different diseases, but at some level they are connected, right? But is there how strong is that theory that because we can do this with sheep with a kissing cousin disease, we can do it with deer and a kissing cousin disease?
Well, as far as how closely related they are, there's a whole bunch of prion diseases. Scrapie is the prion disease in sheep. CWD is the prion disease of deer. BSE, or the mad cow, that's the version that's in cattle. Creutzfeldt-Jakob is the human version. So there's a lot of different prion diseases. Each one manifests itself a little differently in the different species. But suffice to say, scrapie and CWD are, at least similar. So they're not saying, let's try this because they're really, really similar. The deer breeders are saying, let's try this because we successively, eradicated scrapie in our sheep population through this genetic breeding. And that part is true. But what they are jumping way ahead of the game to say, oh yeah, now let's do this in Oklahoma, because they did this over, a long period of time in sheep with a lot of research and killing a lot of animals to do so during the studies. And say there was a 10-step process to eliminate this in sheep. Comparative right now to what's going on in Oklahoma, they are at most at step 3. there's a lot of steps to get to the end note to be similar to what they accomplished in Scrapie. So, is it possible? Nobody knows yet for sure because none of those tests have been done, and they are nowhere near to the same degree of testing or knowledge of this in CWD that they are in, or that we know about in Scrapie. So they are only using that as a comparison because they have identified they did this in Scrapie, or did this with Scrapie and sheep.
So, there's some obvious benefits here if you're in early on this game of ownership of deer that have this more resistant gene. And as we covered, more is in quotation marks here. And you can build up that herd and be able to, distribute individuals or, I imagine like bred does to willing buyers. You're opening up the market when you can then sell it to not just people who have to be licensed as a captive cervid breeder, but I think that kind of hurts the captive breeders as well, because then that genetic intellectual property is then out there on the landscape. I guess it's odd to me. Who wanted this bill? Like, where was the outcry? Did it come from hunters in the state of Oklahoma?
No, not at all. And this is all being pushed by deer breeders as a strategy to remain relevant. Deer breeding industry has been declining over the past decade, in large part because of CWD. So this is a strategy by that industry to continue to try to remain relevant to society. This is one thing they know that they're pushing. They have seen some success with this behind a fence because, these deer live a little bit longer as they prop them up, before they die. So for people in Oklahoma, hunters are certainly not calling for this. The state wildlife agency isn't. And what we know about this, Cal, it will not work in the wild. And the reason that I say that is, as we talked about earlier, this genetic...
That's a pretty definitive statement.
Very definitive, because the genetic testing that we know, okay, these deer in captivity that have this trait seem to live a little longer. We can also study, and this has been done, the genetic traits of deer in the wild in Oklahoma and all these other states. And what we know is deer that have this trait in the wild exist at very, very low percentages because Mother Nature weeds them out very quickly. A deer breeder can prop these deer up through animal husbandry techniques and keep them alive behind a fence. Mother Nature can be cruel. She is not propping anybody up. So these deer just simply don't survive in the wild enough to make any difference. So people say, will this work? No, it can't work. And we know it won't because these deer don't survive outside of a fence.
And, through past CWD conversations, those animals that are carriers of the disease, once they get to a point where the prion levels are high enough to where it is transmittable through nose-to-nose contact, mucus, those longer surviving carriers are potentially just spreading more of the disease around, correct?
That's exactly right. And I've been asked where people say, well, hey, what's it hurt? You say it's not going to work, but isn't it worth a chance? And the answer is, again, a definitive no, because there's not a practical and a reliable live animal test for the disease. The incubation period in the disease is 18 to 24 months on average. And what that means is the vast majority of deer that have CWD don't show any symptoms. You or I can't look at them and tell. Until they get to the end of that period, then they start showing symptoms, and then they die very rapidly. But up until then, they are shedding infectious materials in urine, feces, as you said, direct contact, as a social grooming each other, etc. So they're spreading these infectious materials that will infect other animals on the landscape. So since we don't have a good live animal test, unfortunately, animals are shipped from facility to other facilities on a regular basis. And then this is often how CWD ends up in a new area. Now, I'm not bashing the deer farmers here because they don't want to move an animal that has the disease. It's not in their best interest. Certainly, another facility doesn't want to bring an animal in that has it. But because there's not a live animal test that's practical and reliable, these animals are moved that do have the disease. So when people say, isn't it worth a chance in the wild? Heck no, it's not. Because you could be moving animals from these facilities that have the disease into the wild that now are spreading the disease to new areas, and they are infecting our wild deer. So if we thought this had a 50-50 chance of working, there's still a lot of reason to not stock these deer in the wild. But given that we know it's not going to, there are huge risks of moving this disease around. So, that's the biggest danger here. An animal that's had the disease for a while, the tests do a pretty good job picking that up. But an animal in the early stages, the tests work, they don't work much at all for that. So those are the ones that are often missed. So we are going to expose our wild deer to huge risks when we know it's not going to work. This can't help breed this out in a wild population.
What we got to hit, you kept saying a live animal test, right? Which implies that there's a dead animal test. When you're looking to breed animals, swap that genetic material around, the live part is crucial unless you're using artificial insemination, which is a big part of that industry. But where are we on this live animal test?
There's a lot of work being done on that, and that would be a huge gain for everybody involved with deer. If we had a really good test. So currently, the dead animal tests they're testing the brain, or they're pulling lymph nodes once an animal has died to test those. Those do a good job, identifying, yes, the animal had this disease or not. As far as a live animal test, they can get tonsils or they do rectal biopsies. They don't work real good on elk. Better on mule deer for sure. They definitely work better on whitetails than either of the other species. But what happens is hard to get those samples. Deer don't like to give up pieces, of their butt or of their tonsils. And these are the ones they just, if a deer's in late stages, yeah, we can detect it through those. Early stages, not much at all. So fortunately, there is additional research being done in that testing. And man, I am all for that. I think that so much more research dollars should be put toward live animal tests, because we know the single best way to move this disease is to move a live animal that has it. So if we had a really good live animal test, that could help us tremendously not move these animals from facility to facility, and continue to spread this disease.
And are there variants of CWD? And the reason I ask that is if you have so many variables, like if captor breeder A through Z has their own independent populations that they're selectively breeding, is there the possibility that they could also be breeding more resistant deer, but deer with other strains of CWD?
Well, they know that there's at least 10 different strains of CWD, all of which are 100% fatal to all deer. So I do know, the CWD strain that's in the Scandinavian countries is a different, or seems to be different than what we have here in North America. After that, Cal, you're getting above my knowledge of the different strains part. So what you're asking, there's certainly some concern whether, okay, we start messing with this, and now will some of these strains end up making a more resistant strain? That's a lot of talk about something that's already 100% fatal to all deer. So I don't like that conversation, because I think it draws away from the real conversation at hand is, hey, what do we need to do to protect our animals? And what do hunters and managers really need to know here? I don't care to deal in the nuances of different things when we know, hey, they're still all going to kill every single deer. I think there's better conversations we need to have, and better places to spend money to learn more about this disease so that we can better protect our wild deer.
And gosh, we need hours more to talk about this. So, and I keep saying alliance. I apologize for that. It's just stuck in my head. National Deer Association. Think of any official statements on the two fellows that ate the deer out of the similar area and got Crutchfield Jacobs or Jacobs.
Yeah. Yep. We saw that. We work with the folks, some of the top prion people in the country. Every country has their own top prion research place. In the United States, it's at Case Western Reserve University in Ohio. We know the prion folks there. We consult with them on a regular basis. And so we know, what's being talked about. And there has never been any, confirmation that, yes, this hunter got it from this. So when we saw that article, we immediately went to the source to find out what happened there. As it turns out, that information came from a poster at a conference. A grad student put this poster together, I'm sure having no idea this was going to get construed the way that it did. It has since been, looked at and determined. They talked about, okay, yeah, this guy got CJD. And he was a hunter. You know what? They don't even know if they ate venison from CWD positive deer. They just know they were in an area where the disease had been confirmed in the population, but in most places where CWD is, it still exists at, at 1 or 2% of these deer herds, very low. So that was a huge error on that journal's part to run that. Like if you, as a journalist wrote something like that, you would be, disbarred in your area, or if Jordan did that. So it's pretty crazy what they did. So our stance is there's still no evidence at all that this will jump the species barrier to humans. We still say, hey, if you're in an area that has the disease, get that animal tested, and don't eat it until you get a satisfactory test result, but definitely get it tested so that state agency can learn more about the prevalence rate and the rate of spread. Those are the type of things that we need to be able to battle it. And fortunately, that's something that hunters can do every day. They can all get engaged in that fight.
Yeah, and citizen science is something we love here on the Week in Review, and taking those couple extra steps, or making those extra steps not extra but just normal, contributes to the thing that you love doing, the reason that you're out there doing it, right? So we certainly in support of that. How much are you still hearing the folks, like the people out there who question the concern of CWD in general by saying, well, if a deer can live to 6 with the disease and we shoot most of our deer at 3, what does it matter?
I think the big argument against that is, one, just because it lives to 6 with the disease, you don't want them having the disease continuing to live because they spread it to other animals. One of the differences between the prion diseases, like if a cow has mad cow disease, it can't give it to another cow. It could be in a pasture of 1,000 other animals. And as long as you don't grind that cow's brain up and feed it to the others, it can't give it to the others. And man, I wish CWD was that way, but it's not. So when a deer has it and it's living with others, that deer is shedding infectious materials into the environment that then plants can take up and hold the material. It binds with the soil. So when other animals come in contact with that deer, then other animals become CWD positive as well. And that's one of the dangers of the disease, and allows it to spread so much more rapidly through a deer population than, say, BSE did in cattle. So that's what I tell those people. It's important because you shouldn't eat that unless you know. And 2, we don't want that prevalence rate in that deer herd to continue to rise, because as of right now, we have no way to stop it. The best thing that we can do is maintain it at very low prevalence rates while science has the time to catch up. So that's the fight that we need to engage in each day. And, I firmly believe, every single hunter can engage in that. And that's a good place to be.
Well, it's a great place to be. I mean, think of all the griping and moaning that we do about the big government making our decisions for us, right? This is the way that we can contribute and play our part. So I certainly like that. Right now, in regards to HB 3462 in Oklahoma, it's sitting on the governor's desk right now. Do people in Oklahoma still have a chance to weigh in? Can they at least let their opinion be known?
They certainly can, and actually, our director of policy is going to be meeting with the governor's office to still try to convince them to, hey, this is a bad idea. So yes, people in Oklahoma still have a chance. They can, let the governor know that they oppose this, that this is not good for wild deer or the wildlife conservation. So time is of the essence for sure, Cal, but there still is time.
And then what can folks do to learn more about the National Deer Association and get involved in some of those programs that you mentioned, or just support the overall association?
Yeah, if they care about deer, they can go to deerassociation.com. That's our website. We have all kinds of information there relative to the things that we do, the things we're involved with. Obviously, stuff that we talked about here today. They can sign up for our free weekly newsletter that has this type of information, to keep them abreast of advocacy issues, of deer research issues, etc. So it's free, it's easy to do, and if they care about deer, it's a great place to be able to go to get the information that they're looking for.
Darn right. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming on. It's a tough subject. About something that we all love, and like we kind of unfortunately preach here. Just because it's happening in that state doesn't mean it's not going to affect your state. If not right now, the next legislative session, or the next rulemaking session or regulation session. So learn about what's happening in Oklahoma. For gosh sakes, if you hunt in that place, you should call and let your opinion be known. If you border the state of Oklahoma and you like to hunt, you should call and let your opinion be known, because like we've talked about, those deer don't know where the state of Oklahoma starts and ends. So that deer under that management guideline could become your management issue. Thank you so much, Kip. National Deer Association. We'll get the link up on the website. You're kind of on the hook now to be the deer guy. So we're going to have to drag you back on here, and we got a lot more to talk about, but thank you so much for your time. And folks, check out the National Deer Association, and we'll get the links up on the podcast. But first and foremost, you should call the governor's desk in Oklahoma and let them know your thoughts, concerns, and where you think the health of deer should lie in your state. This just in. Phil, you'll probably come up with a better sound effect than that. Since this episode was recorded, in just a matter of a couple of days, Governor Stitt there in Oklahoma signed the highly controversial Chronic Wasting Disease Genetic Improvement Act. As we talked about it, mostly as House Bill 3462. It is now law. It requires the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food and Forestry to create a pilot program to, quote, enhance the genetic durability of deer in Oklahoma against chronic wasting disease. Man, alive. You guys know my opinion on it. I think this is crazy. The science says it is not sound. And what I'm dying to know, Cal's Week in Review listeners, if you can write in, someone has to have some expertise here. Is there some sort of liability for the state of Oklahoma? Can neighboring states like sue the pants off of these folks because they're going to release farmed deer, which is like widely known to be the source of chronic wasting disease, onto the landscape? Right? And those deer don't know where Oklahoma starts, stops, ends, begins, etc. I think about it this way. I have a chicken with HPAI, and I let it go in Montana. It walks across the state line in North Dakota and mingles with chickens in North Dakota. It's got a big old red tag on its ass that says Cal. That's my responsibility, right? That's my livestock. And that's what captive cervids are in the state of Oklahoma, is livestock. Seems real odd. But just like you, if you're listening to the Cal's Week in Review podcast, I'm here to learn more. educate me. Please write in to ASKCAL. That's AskCal at themeateater.com. If you live in the state of Oklahoma, there's certainly ways to influence how your money is being spent, and you got to stay on top of your public officials and voice your concerns. Make sure they know that you are very scared of seeing your big old whitetail bucks or big old mule deer bucks in the extreme western side of the state impacted potentially negatively, more than likely negatively, by this program. Thanks a bunch. We'll talk to you next week.
Hey guys, turkey season is in full swing right now, and if you are planning on getting after it, make sure to pick up some Meat Eater Phelps turkey calls to stuff into the old turkey vest or into your fanny pack right now. I carry a few different things. I like to use mouth calls, and I like to use pot calls. Mouth calls or diaphragms, I like them because it gives you hand-free calling, meaning when you're working a bird up close, you can have your gun on your knee, finger on the trigger, ready to roll, and still be making turkey sounds. I like pot calls because I just like pot calls. I enjoy calling with a pot call. Whatever direction you go, including a box call, which I don't personally use too much, but they're fun and great, and I started out with them. Yanni, on the other hand, one of my main turkey hunting buddies, he loves box calls. And what's funny is I'll now and then look to him and give him the look that means get out your box call and find us a turkey. So it's not that I don't like them. I just have Yanni use his. Then I don't have to carry it. Go to Phelps Game Calls. Get calls that are made in the USA and get calls that'll get them close. Find yours at phelpsgamecalls.com today.